This podcast is brought to you by Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine for those that love to make and drink great beer. Learn more online or subscribe at beerandbrewing.com or find us on social media at Craft Beer Brew. Welcome to the Craft Beer and Brewing Podcast. I'm your host, Jamie Bogner, co-founder and editorial director of Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine. My guest on the podcast today is Jeff Erway of La Cumbre Brewing in Albuquerque, New Mexico. Welcome to the podcast, Jeff.
Thank you very much for having me, Jamie.
Cool. We'll get into a great conversation here in a second. Can't wait to talk to Jeff about some of IPAs that he's made that have been formative on me and my beer development. But first, we've got a quick message from our supporters. As the brewing industry's premier choice for glycol chilling, G&D Chillers has set the standard on quality, service, reliability, and dedication to their customers' craft. For 25 years, G&D has led the way on innovative solutions that match their brewing customers' immediate and future needs. G&D backs every project they touch and provides service second to none. Contact G&D Chillers today for your chiller sizing needs at 1-800-555-0973. or reach out online at gdchillers.com. Also, the SS Brewtech founders launched with a very clear goal to advance brewing equipment design, performance, and quality to the very highest standards in the industry. With a team that draws upon strong functional backgrounds in brewing science, mechanical engineering, industrial design, supply chain, and manufacturing, SS Brewtech has the people and skill sets you want and expect from your supplier of pro brewing equipment. Head over to ssbrewtech.com for more information on their brew houses and brewing gear. So, Jeff, I first visited your brewery back in 2013 on a road trip back from Tucson, Arizona, where I was down there for the Gem and Mineral Show. And it was late at night, and I needed a beer because I'd been driving through blizzard conditions, through northern Arizona to get there. And I pulled up, I think it was the Beer Advocate app or website to see who the most highly rated brewery was in Albuquerque. Found you guys. Discovered that you had just won a GABF medal for Elevated IPA and thought, oh, shit, I got to go there. Popped in at 10 o'clock at night, sat down at the bar, had a beer, and I think that those beers, Elevated in particular, was one of the first experiences where the next day and the day after that, I could still have this vivid sense memory of the hop profile and how different that was than anything that I had tasted before. And so it was just that interesting, strange impact that it had on me early on, and I don't mean to fawn over it here.
No, I love placation. That's great.
But what struck me from those early days as I was growing in this interest and love of IPAs in particular, was just that kind of depth and complexity that you've grown to be known for with your IPAs. So talk to me a little bit about how your arc developed as a brewer, how you became a professional brewer, and then how you developed an interest in building these kind of layered and nuanced hoppy beers.
Yeah, so, about a little less than 20 years ago, I was growing up in Rochester, New York, and there was a beer stoller there called Beers of the World. There was a coffee table book at a good friend of mine's. It was one of Michael Jackson's, I want to say ultimate beer guide.
Yeah.
And one thing led to another, and I just started making my way through the 3,000 different bottles of beer that they had there. Fast forward a little bit, I was I was working out on the Navajo Reservation as a teacher. Believe it or not, there's not a great selection of craft beer on the Navajo Reservation. I was an absolute craft beer fanatic. I traveled pretty extensively for my 23 years trying beers, and I found myself in Flagstaff, Arizona one night, and the next morning I woke up with a terrible hangover. My wife wanted to go shopping at the Buffalo Exchange. It happened to be right across the street from a home brewing shop. Again, one thing led to another. I bought all my first brewing equipment. I got absolutely fanatical about it. And luckily for me, the second year I was home brewing, we had an influx of new teachers living at this almost like a dormitory kind of thing right next to the school I was working at. And those people drank a lot of beer. And, that was luckily for me because it meant that I got to brew a ton of beer. So I was brewing 2-3 times a week, spending literally 30 hours as a home brewer a week.
The second job.
It was such an amazing way to build that passion. And, obviously, during this time, I could go on and on about all the trips I took and all the amazing commercial brewers that I grew to become friends with.
Yeah.
I was lucky enough to win, several home brewing awards. And, in a conversation with one specific head brewer, they recommended that I go to brewing school. And I did that. And that head brewer, Ted, was at Cumbre River at the time. And right after I graduated, he hired me. And that was an amazing experience. He was getting Marble Brewery opened at the time, another great brewery from Albuquerque. And instead of, me spending the next couple of years working not just underneath somebody, he literally just threw me into the fire. And I had to run that brewery on my own while he was getting Marble Brewery open. And it was a really great crash course in commercial brewing. And then, after a few years running Cumbre River Brewing Company, I realized that I had the backing from my community of friends, and that I could get. I thought at the time I could get La Cumbre Brewing Company open. There were some moments there where I had some serious self-doubt, but I luckily was able to work through them.
Yeah. So when you launched the brewery, did you have a specific product focus in mind?
Absolutely. I wanted to drown Albuquerque in hops. I thought at the time, there was nothing unabrasive about what I thought the craft brewing public wanted. I'd gone out, I'd spent several years going to the San Diego Real Ale Festival and stuff, and I was like, this is what Albuquerque is missing right now in craft brewing. And then while I was at Chama, I definitely, tested the market with some really aggressive beers. I mean, at the time, using 5.5 pounds per barrel, total would have been like, that's insane. But obviously moving forward, that number has grown considerably while the overall bitterness that people are going for has come down. Which I think, we're all the better for. Nuance is a good thing.
There seems to be a character, I think, to elevate it into some other New Mexico IPAs that almost feels like the place. Like I have this kind of sense connection when I drink New Mexico and Albuquerque IPAs, where they're dry, and they almost feel a little bit like the desert. Just that kind of you catch those glimpses of brightness, as you roll through this kind of dry experience. Do you get the same kind of, and I get that same kind of regional sense when you go to the Pacific Northwest and hop into Portland, and you're like, wait, oh shit, they love dank stuff up here, don't they? Tell me a little bit about how the brewers influence each other and how that reflects itself in some of the flavors in the beers.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's no secret that probably, at this point, 70% of the city's brewers, the largest brewers in the city of Albuquerque, have all either trained under Ted at Marble, myself, or my director of brewery operations, Daniel, or somebody else that's trained under us. Yeah. And so, there's definitely some groupthink there going on. I like to believe that we do a good job of trying to differentiate ourselves a little bit, and I think that's happened even more over the years. I think maybe if you came in 2013, which you said you did, and tried all the IPAs, I think there might have been a little bit more ubiquity going on. But I think it's
I've since been back. I think in 2015 and 2017. But
there's more differentiation in the market for sure. I think what the brewers in Albuquerque, first of all, do like to have a fair amount of malt balance. We all really like the use of calcium chloride in the mash for the most part. We all really like the use of calcium sulfate extensively, and that definitely affects mouthfeel for sure. A lot of us are using the same exact yeast, or at least a derivation of that yeast, some kind of Chico ale. We all like, just like the food of Albuquerque, we like big, bold flavors, and it's no secret that green chili goes pretty darn well with IPA
for sure.
And so I think the food has definitely driven the flavor of our beers as much as anything.
When I was last down there, you told me something interesting, and that's we were talking about hazy IPA that you'd launched, that you were about to pull off the shelves because it just wasn't selling as well as you wanted to sell, which seemed like this crazy counter narrative that the New Mexico audience really does prefer, dry, more West Coast style IPAs. Has that proven out for you, or has the market started to come around?
The market has started to come around to them. As have I.
Yeah.
And it's not to say that it's my favorite style. It's not my favorite style.
Sure.
But I have definitely grown a great appreciation not only for a really well-made one, but how hard it actually is to make. These, there was a concept, especially amongst us old curmudgeons that have been doing this for, for what feels like a century, but really is only like a little more than a decade. It was lazy brewing, and it was easy to do. Any beer is easy to brew poorly.
Sure.
Any beer.
Yeah.
But to brew specifically those beers really well, it does take a challenge. So back to the consumer, though. The consumer in Albuquerque, I think, it needed to be teased a little bit. It needed to, people needed to be exposed to it. But now, Marble's released a year, I think it's a year-round beer in Desert Fog, and I think that's selling pretty well for them. We have taken the other route of throwing a lot of really big draft-only, taproom-only releases that are, on the shelf and off the shelf in a couple weeks.
Right.
Sometimes selling out in days. And but we also do 2-month release of El Jugo, or 2 or 3 month release of Sunfade, and those beers are increasingly moving better. But the fads, New Mexico's a small place. It is socioeconomically a little depressed. People don't travel nearly as much as they do in other parts of the country, and so we were, there weren't that many people traveling out to, Boston or even Chicago and trying those beers there. The first time they tried those beers was the first time we brewed those beers. Maybe it's just I wasn't brewing them all that well at first. I don't know, but they've definitely warmed up to them for sure. I mean, to the point where I would say, between Marble and La Cumbre, we're probably going to brew between the two of us 6,000 barrels of those beers this year.
Right. Tell me a little bit about your design and process as you're thinking about a beer. How do you go from envisioning it to creating a recipe, writing a recipe, deciding what ingredients to use and what kind of proportions, and then walking through that kind of execution and realization iteration process? It's been a long CBC. My language is a little bit loose now.
I hear you. So that depends on the style for sure. I will admit that I never have thought of myself as being some creative genius. I've always thought of myself as being a much more technical brewer than I am some savant that is going to set the world on fire with a new flavor that's never been created before. I do consider myself a master of recreation of the classics. And so when I set out to brew a Helles lager, I want it to taste like the very best Helles lager the last time I was in Bavaria.
Yeah. And
I want to recreate that experience not only for myself, but for everyone else. And I don't think I can improve on that. I really don't. To me, it would show a great deal of hubris for me to try to say, that time I was at Ondex and I was looking out at the Bavarian Alps and having a Moss of Helles, I think I can do better than that.
I know, but this idea of better, I think we get wrapped up in a little bit too much. I think and even when you travel through Bavaria and taste different expressions of these beers, there can be multiple expressions of great, and they can be very different from each other, and they're both valid in different ways. They're both excellently executed, with different design perspectives. And I think, when we start talking about beer, made by American breweries for American consumers, it's also possible to make them great in ways that appeal directly and feel great, to those American audiences.
Absolutely. And when somebody hands me a Pilsner that's been dry hopped with 2 pounds per barrel of Hallertau Mittelfrüh and, a new, experimental hop from HBC up in Pacific Northwest and it's unfiltered, I think to myself, maybe this is an exceptional beer. It's just not Pilsner. It's just marketed, a little inaccurate.
Aren't all those beer names, though, just marketing? I mean, even the whole concept of style. Mm-hmm. It's really just a way to, hopefully create some connection between something someone had before and this other thing that they haven't had before.
Yeah.
And explain to them that it's kind of like that,
Yeah.
I mean, the idea of style, I try to not look at it as rules because even the guides that we have for styles are all created based on historical examples, or created from commercial examples. And, I think it's those brewers that ultimately drive the bus on what those styles become and not vice versa.
Yeah, I guess my point is that there are certain styles that I will take a great deal of artistic license with, and there are those that I will not.
And certainly a style I'm
going to take a lot more artistic license with an 8% alcohol hazy double IPA
sure.
than I am with a Pilsner or
it's
a
like
Dortmunder.
Punk rock. There's no tradition to yield to there, and no expectation.
Right, exactly. Whereas if you're playing a solo of Rachmaninoff, and he's written every single note that you're supposed to play there. Not much artistic license to be had.
Although, I've said it before as I was talking to Sean from Cerebral on the podcast, if I've listened to a fair amount of classical music and we listen to different conductors and different orchestras, some of these pieces, even though they're the same notes, can sound, very different. And so, there's always space for expression within these.
So, let's talk about IPAs because that's what I'm. That's kind of my shtick. It makes up over 70% of what I brew, and it's definitely what put me in Albuquerque on the map. So first off, I always start with my malt, and I select the malt for what I'm obviously what I'm trying to create. I don't ever use a German base malt for IPAs. It's just not, the Pilsner, the biscuity Pilsner malt to me is not not the best. It's not the best use of that malt.
Okay.
And I found more and more that I'm kind of iffy on using big, bold British pale malts too. I used to quite a bit, and what I've found is that I'm beginning to appreciate the sort of neutrality of American and Canadian grown two-row and Pilsner malts as a nice, and I'll use the word, it's because it's the way I think about it in my mouth. In my mouth is a soft malt base, and especially when it comes to hazy, any kind of hazy IPA. And I have backed away significantly from caramel malts, especially the darker ones. When I want to create color in my IPAs, I generally look towards darker Munich malts.
Okay.
And darker meaning not necessarily the ones that you're looking at from many of the German maltsters that are currently available to, especially the ones available to homebrewers. Those really top out at like 10 Lovibond, but some of the ones from the American malt companies, you can get upwards of 25, 30 Lovibond. I mean, that's a fair amount of color that you can get from those malts without using any caramel malt at all. And I do want a malt base to these beers. I don't tend to like the beers that are really brashly bitter, which I really like, but also have no malt depth to them at all.
So why eliminate the caramel malt?
Well, there's a lot of reasons. First of all, I do believe that caramel malts in general compete heavily with hop aromatics and hop flavor. But in addition to that, it's been known for quite a while that caramel malts are a really good source of the precursors to E2-nonenal, the oxidative characteristic that we all think of as being cardboardy. And I was listening to a great brewer speak a bunch of years back, and he impressed me with his statement that he's saying, look, I'm not making, he runs a larger brewery, and he said, I'm not making the single greatest IPA I can possibly make for the brewer that tries that beer the second it comes out of the filter, the second it comes out of the bright tank for the first time. I'm brewing the greatest IPA that my average consumer is actually going to drink. And so he knew that the average consumer is going to be drinking that at 10 weeks. You can complain all you want about the fact that that's depressing, but it is a fact.
Right.
And so you need to create an IPA. If you want, you need to create an IPA around that. And, maybe your use of hops isn't best throwing, 3 pounds per barrel in your dry hop for a beer like that. Maybe you'd be better off throwing it in the whirlpool.
Let's unpack that a little bit more. But first, I want to acknowledge our sponsors on this episode. Great beers are made from select ingredients. With BSG, you'll bring the world to your brew house with an unparalleled and diverse selection of ingredients from across the globe to just down the road. Their dedicated customer service team and industry experience provides you with the assistance you need in every step of the way. Let BSG be your supplier of choice for products essential to making great artisanal beverages so you can stay focused on your craft. For more information, visit them at bsgcraftbrewing.com or call 1-800-374-2739. Also, this episode is brought to you by the American Homebrewers Association, an organization dedicated to homebrewing and the worldwide community of homebrewers. I think that's an interesting thing to think about what your recipe looks like, not when it's in the tank or not when it's immediately packaged, but how that beer is going to develop when your average consumer, drinks it. Also, given the variety of different, storage conditions that it's going to be stored in, how do you think about that as you're, in addition to these caramel malts? Obviously, that's one consideration. Are there other considerations in terms of how you hop and which hops you use and other techniques you may use in the brew house in order to promote that kind of longevity?
Yeah, it is so cool. Some of the studies that Dr. Shellhammer and the people at the really large hop brokerage companies are doing on the stability of hop flavors, hop stability index and stuff. And I would be talking out of turn to try to say that I understand that chemistry better than I do. What I will say, so I can't really address the hop variety as far as, its longevity of aroma, but I can say that the hop aromatics that a brewer can get from whirlpool hopping and from hop back hopping have a great deal more longevity than any hop aromatics you're going to get from dry hopping. In my opinion, a 3-month-old IPA that has been dry hopped at 4 or 5 pounds per barrel smells like it was barely dry hopped at all. Most of the time. It was all went down the drain. But more what we do at our company is we work our absolute tails off to make sure that we have the freshest beer that's humanly possible in the market. And we spend an enormous amount of money making our company far less profitable by doing just that. We control when our beer when our beer ships and how our beer ships. And I would much rather ship less beer to our distributors in Arizona and Colorado every 2 weeks than ship once a month. Because I know that I'm going to be able to get them the freshest beer possible. I'm not going to completely reformulate Elevated IPA. That beer has been my number one selling beer since the very day we opened. And I knew it would be, and I designed it that way. And I'm not going to just completely redesign the beer just because I have, because I worry that somebody's going to drink it when it's 120 days old. We just make darn sure that it's not ever, and that's the key to that for me. But there is a lot of things you can do design-wise to make sure that those beers have a nice, fresh hop aroma. That I've tried 3 or 4 IPAs lately that are really nice beers, even at 2.5, 3 months old. And I try them, and there is a nice hop aroma. And I talk to the brewer, and they're like, "Yeah, we don't dry hop that beer at all." And again, you brought up the concept of what is better and stuff. Well, that's a really good concept for, I think, brewers to start thinking about that. Is this beer? Obviously, if you go to smell an IPA and you're smelling buttered popcorn, that's worse. Always. Right. But if just because you smell a beer and it smells like fresh ripe mangoes, does that make that a better beer than that IPA that you smelled that smelled like, fresh pine needles and orange zest? There are certain people that would like it better, but I don't think that necessarily makes it just a better beer.
Yeah, I think concepts of better are culturally constructed and shift quickly, especially in today's market.
Yes.
And at the same time, the entire brewing industry is actively engaged in how we push that in various directions. The hops growers are trying to produce hops that can create flavors that brewers want that are on these kind of things.
We just got to be careful because there can be unintended consequences to what we do. For instance, and the studies are not conclusive yet, but I think a lot of us have our own predictions as to what some of the unintended consequences have been of brewers constantly pushing the hop growers and the processors to keep kilning and pelletizing temperatures down. I think that's resulted in some of the highest quality pellets we've ever had that also have some of the highest levels of alpha amylase, beta amylase, and glucosidases that we've ever seen in hops. And that can result in some really, really unpredictable shelf stability issues potentially, but also, just production nightmares.
Tell me about that. Have you had some experiences with...
I haven't had some experiences with them.
Okay.
I've had just enormous nightmares.
Yeah? Like what?
Well, I'll just tell I'll tell the worst experience we had.
Okay.
Pretty early on when we first experienced this, we brewed a beer. It was a 6.5% alcohol, hazy, fruit forward IPA that we had designed on our 3-barrel brew house, and we really loved it. And we went and dry hopped it, and same thing had happened that had happened a couple times before. On the third day, we dumped hops, and on the third day we started to notice a re-fermentation in the tank, and we were like, shoot. And we always keep our tanks at like 15 psi.
Okay.
We keep head pressure on the fermenters because I don't want the hop aroma gassing off.
Sure.
And then we, on the fourth day, we noticed it was keep on dropping a little bit, but it really slowed down. And we were tracking diacetyl levels, and diacetyl was just taking forever to get rid of it. We dumped hops and yeast. And all of a sudden it re-fermented again and created even more diacetyl. I'm talking like it would go, the beer originally had gone from diacetyl negative, like below threshold, to 6-7 times threshold. So like there's no way to serve this beer.
Right.
Can't do it. Can't crash it. And the pressure came up again and diacetyl really started to slowly come down. And then we dumped hops and yeast again because we're trying to get the yeast out of solution, the dead yeast out of solution. We're trying to get hops out of solution so that we can eventually, someday, transfer a pretty low, beer that has pretty low cell counts. That happened 2 or 3 times that we dumped hop. And what we would notice as soon as we dumped the hops and yeast, 2 things happened. Head pressure would drop by 4 or 5 psi because obviously we've removed some stuff from the tank.
Right.
And re-fermentation would kick up again. And after the 3rd time, my head brewer and I were sitting there thinking, we are retarded. Because clearly what had happened is we relieved hydrostatic pressure on the yeast cell walls that allowed the yeast to re-ferment more. And so, that resulted in us reformulating exactly what our standard operating procedures would be with those beers. And at this point, we just encourage that re-fermentation. We want it to happen right away as soon as humanly possible so that we get it over with and we get that diacetyl reduced and also so that we know for a fact it's not going to happen in the can.
So how do you encourage it now then?
Keeping temperatures up there.
Okay.
Setting our pressure relief valve at 5 psi.
Okay.
Just, realizing that that's a compromise we needed to make.
Right.
And we do a forced fermentation test to make sure that, that after, and we do that, we pull that sample after dry hopping, well after dry hopping. So as soon as we see a sign of re-fermentation, we're like, pull it, see what it's going to get down to.
Yeah.
And we haven't had that kind of issue since. But that being said, needless to say, the unintended consequence of I personally believe, it is my hypothesis, that what we're going to find is that those processing temperatures have more to do with this re-fermentation phenomena than any kind of hop variety does.
Interesting.
That's my personal hypothesis. I am completely open to someone proving me wrong about that, but that's what I think. And
that's an interesting viewpoint, and it's one that I hadn't heard before.
Yeah. So to me, again, there could be compromises on both sides of things.
Sure.
But the fact that it's taking a lot of brewers 3 to 4 weeks to produce IPAs some certain types of IPAs right now is a royal pain in the behind. When most of us are so used to producing 10 to 12 day beers. And quite frankly, I know there's probably some homebrewers out there that are cringing hearing that. Trust me that the very best IPAs I've ever produced were in 10 to 12 days. And the IPA, the elevated IPA that won a gold for me at GABF was a 9-day beer.
There you go.
So I think there's a lot of misconceptions out there about time and maturation and stuff, but
maybe some producers will start pelletizing and kilning at some higher temperatures for certain producers in order to bring that.
There's a lot of research. I think there's a lot of research that can be done over the next couple of years, and I'm sure somebody smarter than I will come up with a solution. But I will also say, from the producer standpoint, it is such a small niche corner of the market.
Right.
But that being said, with all the new brewers coming in that don't understand some of these major issues that can come up, and all the mobile canning lines and mobile bottling lines, and all the people putting their beer into bottles and cans, what worries me is that it might push the hands of the producers in a way that we really don't want to happen. Yeah. Exploding cans or exploding bottles is the worst possible nightmare for the brand of craft beer that I can see coming in anytime in the near future. Because you're not going to see something on NBC News or Fox News about specific brewery. They're going to say craft brewer, showers baby with bottle of beer or something like that. And that's the scariest thing in the world to me. And that would get some change pretty darn quick.
for sure. For sure. No, you're right. I mean, the industry needs to be proactive about that. And that goes for a lot of different places. Packaging is one of those. I can name numerous ones where if brewers are not proactive about things like ingredient labeling and allergen labeling and whatnot, if you don't self-regulate, then government regulation will come, because there will be some disastrous experience. And then
and that's the kind and self-regulation is always 99% of the time better than government regulation.
For sure.
Yeah.
Let's go back to talking about hops, a little bit there. Talk to me about some of your, how you evaluate hops, both from a quality perspective and then how you visualize how these hops will work together in finished beers.
Yeah, so
you do a lot of that experimentation in like Project Dank series and moving things in and out and exploring those different combinations. I'd like to learn more about that.
Obviously I'm always trying to, get that competitive advantage of keeping my hand firmly on the pulse of what new hops are coming out. I am constantly bugging my brokers for anything new and interesting, and that includes, us being the first brewery in the country to use hops from South Africa, which I think there's still quite a bit of potential to come out of that country. So long as ABI still allows us to buy them.
You can read more about that in a past issue of Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine.
I think, from my perspective, they're obviously, I'm greatly concerned not just about the sheer amount of bitterness, but the quality of bitterness. I think for a while there, I was throwing I was, throwing a grenade of Chinook into each batch of my IPAs, and that can come across sometimes as a coarser bitterness than I really want. I am a firm believer in CO2 hop extracts for a good majority of the bitterness. I feel like they have come a long way in the quality of bitterness that they can add to beers. And then,
when you say quality of bitterness, what is that range that you're talking about there? And could you put words to it?
Yeah, I mean, I think if you're going for the amount of bitterness that you say, not to point a finger, but like what I remember, Rogue Old Crustacean used to being like, that is just such an onslaught of bitterness. But because it's such a big beer, it can also it can handle that. But what I really, really, really try to avoid is that kind of aspirin-like bitterness where you're sucking on an aspirin tablet or it gets caught in the back of your throat. I can't stand that. It immediately takes away from all drinkability for me. It's right up there with diacetyl as far as completely taking away from what I want in an IPA. But then we go on to flavor hops, and I'm personally a big fan of putting those classic piney, grapefruity hops in large doses into the Whirlpool and into the hop back. The majority of my whole leaf contract is Centennial, Cascade, and Crystal. And Crystal's another one of those hops that really gets overlooked a lot. And I think I don't know if it's a sexy enough variety right now, or if it's marketed well enough to get favor with more craft brewers. But it's wonderful, and it's really cool how different that hop can be, whether it's grown in Yakima, Idaho, or Oregon. And probably the greatest hop I smelled this year up in the Pacific Northwest was Oregon grown Cascade. Crystal. So onward. I am also a fan of pushing new flavors and new aromatics in the dry hop, and to me, I try to find out as early as possible after and obviously we go to Yakima and do selection, and I do a lot of avoid when I'm up there. I avoid any kind of diesel fumes. I avoid garlic and onion like the plague. And I often do look for at least one variety to have that cattiness, and I often look for one variety to have, just sometimes when you're sitting there on the table, it just one hop, and this year it was our Mosaic, just jumps out at you like this is going to be the hop that we wished we had contracted more of come around October of next year. And then I go back and I brew with all of them on our 3-barrel pilot system, and I make sure that we have a very firm idea of what those hops are going to do. And I am a huge believer in blending, especially for flagship IPAs. I don't like to ever put all my eggs in one basket, because I want a drinker that becomes really familiar with my Elevated IPA brand to never say, hey, that does not taste like Elevated IPA. I want them to always think that, always know that they can come back to that beer and it is the same. And then, with Project Dank, it's just that, we trial a lot of different recipes on our pilot system. It used to be a beer that we just put up a production of and roll the dice and say, hey, yeah, that's our packaged Project Dank. And anymore we are trialing those recipes on our pilot system, and now we're going to do 4 big releases every year of a seasonal Project Dank. And we take a lot of brewers' opinions into that, including sometimes brewers that don't work for us. Ask them to come over, give them a couple free beers, and what I'm looking for changes from season to season, and it changes with the different varieties. We recently released Altimeter, and we all knew what we were going for in that, and we were going for a softer bitterness and a beer that had a really beautiful orange and orange, mainly orange complexity to it. And I'll be open and honest, that was completely inspired by a stop at Freem on the way up to Yakima last year. We stopped and tried their Golden IPA. I was like, this is amazing. I want to make something like this. And hopefully Josh doesn't mind that I got inspiration from him. But then, and then something like our newly released Acclimated, I'm trying to make a little bit more of a classic American Pale Ale with a twist a little bit in the nose. But I think all of us as brewers are not only clued into the public's desire, but our own desire for a little bit more drinkability and a little less just reaching out of the bottle or can and smacking people across the face.
Sure.
We all are.
When you're talking about your hop loads, how do rough percentages between, say, Whirlpool hop back and dry hop? How do you balance those?
I do believe you can go overboard in just about everywhere. Dry hop certainly allows for a little bit more than anywhere else. We never.
Because there are a fair number of brewers I talk to who are really just doing very little at all on the hot side and pushing it all into dry hop.
Right.
There's some that are using their Whirlpool for their bittering. I'm just curious how your approach looks like.
I will tell you straight up. Our approach for hazies is very generic to us.
Okay.
And we do change around varieties, but we are anywhere between a half a pound and 1 pound per barrel, and we never add hops before the Whirlpool for those beers.
Yeah.
And that's not to say that we wouldn't try it, but as I've moved on in my career, I believe less and less of those hops that you're adding at 15 minutes and even 5 minutes are actually coming through in the aromatics of the beer. And so then
you're just isomerizing.
Yeah,
even with
I
those
don't.
short
No, I
times?
don't. No, not us. No, that's the point. Is you're wasting them because you're not really isomerizing those alpha acids, and you're just boiling off the aromatics. You're boiling, volatilizing those aromatics. If we do have a good, if we have access to a cool aromatic hop for Whirlpool for hop back hopping, I will throw up to 1 pound per barrel in the hop back. And because I don't believe you're really getting almost any bitterness from those.
Okay.
And I'm, without an HPLC or mass spec gas chromatography, you're not getting a full picture of what your bitterness is in any dry hop beer. That's kind of the general consensus now.
Right.
And we got a UV light spec thinking, hey, we're going to be able to test bitterness levels in beer, and turns out probably not. So for those, that's kind of the way we approach the hot side. On the cold side, bare minimum 3 pounds per barrel of dry hops, and we've gone all the way up to like 8 pounds per barrel. And I know that that's nothing, that other people aren't doing. What we don't do is we don't do any dry hopping until primary fermentation.
right.
is pretty darn well complete.
Yeah. You're not a biotransformation acolyte.
I've just yet to see any hard and fast evidence for it. That doesn't mean I'm trying to tell whoever that is a huge believer in it that they're wrong.
Sure.
I just know what's worked for us and what and that's worked for us really well.
Yeah. There's certainly production considerations that it benefits as well.
I don't know about that.
Yeah.
I just I don't like getting covered in dry hop beer, and I've gotten covered in dry hop beer because carbon dioxide hadn't had a chance to really blow off.
Right.
That sucks. But with West Coast IPAs, I never really go below 60. 60 calculated IBUs. When we test bitterness of the wort, of the hopped wort, it's always up in the 80 range, but that's going to come down.
Yeah.
And just because I like bitter West Coast IPAs, I do. And
There's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah, and then we will go up to in the calculated 180 200 range for really intense double IPAs. We've moved more and more away from the whole 30-minute, 15-minute editions, and we're just doing huge Whirlpool editions. We'll go up to 3-4 pounds per barrel between the Whirlpool and the hopback.
Okay.
And then we really don't go above like 4 pounds per barrel in any of our West Coast IPAs or double IPAs. For whatever reason, I just don't think they come across. And especially because of the types of hops we're also using.
Right.
Obviously, there's cross contamination of what kind of hops you're using, but I'm not using Chinook as a dry hop in my hazy IPA. but I'll use the crap out of it in I use a ton of it in elevated, and I really like the result. And I do feel like there's a huge law of diminishing returns, especially on those West Coast IPAs.
Right.
You're just grinding up $100 bills and throwing them into the tank, and you're not really getting anything out of it.
That's great for Instagram, though.
Yeah, exactly.
Putting those $100 bills in the tank.
Don't I know it? And
there's been some studies on that too. That there is that point where you're just putting more mass that will ultimately settle out of the beer rather than stay in solution. But
I will say I want to see more done on that though with the hazy IPAs, because the difference between 4 pounds per barrel and 8 pounds per barrel, I'm not going to say you're getting double the aroma, but there is a big difference. I mean, it's not a little bit. It's huge, and I know my Yakima, hopefully my Yakima Chief or Indie Hop or any of the other brokers are listening to this, because they just love hearing this kind of stuff. They're like, oh, please, yes, tell all the brewers to start using 8 pounds per barrel. Maybe they'll come. Maybe they'll actually pick up all their contracts this year.
You're using a lot of hops there. What kind of, do you use any specific extraction techniques as you in dry hop? I mean, I know a lot of brewers are either rousing or recirculating or using some hop torpedoes and guns and a whole variety of tools that are really geared towards improving the extraction of hops. What kind of strategy do you take around that?
Well, so we use a hop cannon, and that's not for extraction purposes. That's for safety purposes, and for keeping down dissolved oxygen in the finished beer. Plain and simple. I don't like the idea of a brewer climbing on top of a tank with 240 pounds of dry hops, and opening a door and throwing those hops in. Sitting on top of a
volcano of exploding beer.
Exactly. Yeah. So hop cannons are a really great tool, and there are a lot of other really great tools that can do just as well for you. And so we have the big sweep.
Still waiting for the homebrew equivalent of this, where you can purge the vessel before you push the hops into the fermentation vessel. But
I think if you're a home brewer, there's a lot of other things you could worry about a lot more than what kind of dissolved oxygen you're adding when you're adding your dry hops.
When you're adding an ounce of hops.
Hopefully more than that. In any case, that's our approach with that. Anything that's over, so we have a 30-barrel brew house, but we still do have two 15-barrel fermenters. Those two 15-barrel fermenters, we never worry about recirculating hops, spinning, so-called spinning the tank. When we get to 30 barrels, we will, as soon as you get to like 2 pounds per barrel, we will spin the tank.
Yeah.
And we'll do that on several occasions over a 2-day period. And with anything above 30 barrels, we always spin the tank because there's just so much liquid there that won't come in contact with. And we've done several trials on this, and I, if I didn't care about real estate, and tank time, maybe I could dry hop that 120 of elevated IPA for 2 weeks, and I would get the kind of impact that I wanted. But I'm a firm believer in short contact time for dry hops, and I feel like New Belgium did a really good job a few years ago of doing some contact time studies, and I know some people are going to ignore it, but what they came up with was like 2 days is about as much as you need.
Yeah.
And we find 3 or 4 days is like that's you're done after 3 or 4 days. So we now with our hazies we wait longer because we want to know that that's not going to start re-fermenting.
Sure.
But honestly, we've found the same thing with Riot IPA, and we're trying to figure out why that beer is re-fermenting. But that beer is regularly re-fermenting on us now, and we're not.
Interesting.
And it's
it never did before.
It never did before.
Huh.
Never. Huh. And we're also like looking at the varieties, and we're switching up some because we have multiple suppliers for certain hop varieties, and we're trying to see does it re-ferment with these hops from this supplier? Yes. Does it re-ferment with these hops from this supplier? Also yes. And you're trying to figure out, well, what is the common denominator there?
Right. Are there any other techniques that you use to that you're a big fan of for either decreasing oxygen in the brew house workflow or maintaining the integrity of these beers that can be damaged pretty easily.
Yeah, I mean, I think hot side aeration is fairly well documented. Whether you believe whether you believe it's detrimental to shelf stability or not, it certainly darkens wort, and the guys and gals who have talked to me about hot side aeration and its effects are a lot smarter than I am. So I'm going to listen to them until I hear something different.
Sure.
So I think if you're a home brewer or a brew pub brewer that everything's going out of the tap room, it's not something you really should be all that concerned about.
Yeah.
There's a lot of other things you can bide your time with, but pump seals. I'm going to probably end up buying a whole ton of new pumps here because we feel that the pumps we currently have are, first of all, we're constantly replacing the seals, which means there's wort getting by that probably getting oxidized. I think a lot of pump manufacturers to decrease costs have gone to external seals on their pump heads. Well, in an external seal, if you have any kind of leak, you're going to be sucking air in,
right.
And with internal seals, you'll be pushing beer out. So I do like internal seal pumps. They're expensive, but I think they're probably worth it. There's nothing, but to that end, I've got a hopback. There's nothing about a hopback that doesn't scream hot side aeration to me.
Yeah.
And we've done some things to hopefully help with that. Obviously we're not the size of a company like Odell's that has a hopback where they could probably purge it with CO2 and keep it sealed the whole time. That's pretty cool. I don't have that kind of money right now, but we do fill from the bottom slowly, and only then do we kind of go around the tangential arm once it's full. From there on, we just follow, I think, we do what separates any great brewer from the good to mediocre brewers, and I think we just follow really great standard operating procedures. And I'll pat the backs of the vast majority of brewers that I've worked with, and that and that have gone on and gone on either from Cumbre or any other the great breweries down in Albuquerque. We got a lot of great brewers down there doing a really great job of making beer that maybe I wouldn't have made, or maybe somebody else would have made, but they're following great standard operating procedures. And I feel like that's the thing that has had so many people that I've talked to talking about, why is the beer from Albuquerque of all places pretty darn good? And it's pretty simple. It doesn't take rocket science to realize that these people are just really know what they're doing as far as yeast handling, and really know what they're doing as far as racking room operations, and just good SOPs.
Yeah, it's easy to focus on the recipe and think that makes a whole lot of difference, but when it comes down to it, it's not necessarily that.
I've always said you can give me the worst beer recipe in the world, and I can probably make you a perfectly drinkable beer, and you can give the greatest recipe in the world, to a really inexperienced brewer, and they can make something completely undrinkable. I've always, recipes matter. Sure, absolutely, recipes matter. And I always thought it was so cool the way that Vinny Cilurzo just made his Pliny the Elder recipe just public knowledge. And I've done the same thing with all my recipes, because I know even a great commercial brewer is going to take that into their facility, and it's going to be a great beer, but it's not going to be elevated IPA. It's going to be a different beer. So to me, the recipes are it's fun. That's the fun part of it. Sitting around a table with, one of the greatest parts of my job is sitting around the table with my head brewer, Alan, my director of brewery operations, Daniel, and sitting there drinking beers together and talking about the next specials that we're going to be doing, and coming to the table. Sometimes we'll come to the table and just have a dart throwing operation where we just throw a lot of ideas out, and sometimes we'll each individually come up with 3 recipes and talk about what we like about each other's recipes, and what we're gonna, but I don't like that, and well, I don't like that about yours, and we'll come together, and that's super fun.
Yeah.
But it's not nearly as important as the mind melding sessions that we have as a greater team about what's going right and what's going wrong in our cellar room standard operating procedures. Those are the things that make sure not just that one special tasted great, but make sure that every single beer that's coming out of your facility tastes great.
That makes sense. What does the future of innovation at La Cumbre look like? There are a lot of trends going on. Obviously, you have come around on hazy IPAs and are making those now. We'll see how long that trend lasts. Certainly adjuncted flavor-forward stouts are a big move now, and a large number of brewers have jumped back in the lager game and seem to be putting some chips behind as they bet on that growth. For you, and you make a beer. It's literally called just beer, La Cumbre beer. Your own light lager approach. What does that future look like for you?
So first of all, that beer is one of the greatest pieces of pride for me because I've beaten the very largest breweries in the world at their own game twice now, and that makes me feel awfully darn good. Note to everyone listening to this podcast: drink more lager. My CFO would hate me for saying this because it takes up a lot of tanks, but I love making them and I really love drinking them. So give me an excuse to make more lagers. That being said, I wish I could say that I am the person that sees the future better than others. I think, obviously the brewers of the Northeast really caught on to something that the rest of us were really missing.
Yeah.
About what the craft consumer not only would want but will want probably into the future. I mean, there's still an enormous cross section of craft beer drinkers that have never tried what we call either East Coast IPA or hazy IPA. I do feel like there is going to be a kind of a responsibilizing of the craft industry a little bit, and I think there is going to be some lighter, lower alcohol beers becoming popular. I certainly hope so. As a father of two that's chomping on 40 years old, I love sitting down and having two American Pale Ales. So we released Acclimated American Pale Ale, and it is, we call it the beer for IPA drinkers when they're not drinking IPA, and I absolutely love this new beer, and I hope everybody gets a chance to try it and they like it too. And I would love to brew more of those styles, because I think when we have an opportunity ourselves as brewers to brew them more often, we all get better at them, and then we all start competing with each other, and that makes us even better at them, and that's a great thing for the consumer too. I really hope that the future of craft beer isn't all of us trying to keep up with each other by making alcoholic seltzer. I just, and that's not to say I don't ever drink a vodka LaCroix. I probably shouldn't have said that, but I said that. It's not to say that I have a problem with that. And if that's what you think your brand is going to increase your brand portfolio and it is going to increase your profitability, far be it from me to criticize. I'm not going to do it.
We're back to the same crystal ball issues. Folks were betting on cider in the same kind of way a few years ago, and it hit a certain point and then just flattened out.
But to that end, my friends over at Tractor Brewing Company, I think that's their number one selling stuff right now, and they're about 5,000 barrels a year, and a lot of what they produce is cider. And the cool thing about that to me is that you have this whole other. They brought a whole other cross section of the population into their tap rooms.
Oh, and I'm not trying to say anything negative about cider. We love cider. It's just didn't the hopes that the sector the market kind of pinned on cider for bringing these new drinkers in. It worked up to a point, and it just flattened out. And and I think hard seltzer is probably a similar type of product where it'll grow, and then just flatten again when it hits the maximum number of folks that want to drink that.
I'll tell you what I will do and what I won't do. What I will do is absolutely accept that the things that we think of as beer is growing, and I think overall that's a good thing for the industry.
Yeah.
I will not lose sight of what I do for a living, and that's make beer. And if someone wants me to make my beer taste like stuff that has absolutely nothing to do with beer, if you want me to throw, cherry pies into my beer, that's probably not going to happen. I honestly, I was so happy when I had to, I mean, my CFO hated, but I was so happy when I had to buy back pumpkin beer a couple years back. And I just thought to myself, like, honestly, like, I was questioning, you question your own integrity sometimes because, like, I'm sorry, I'm making stuff for people that really don't want to drink beer. And we're brewers and we make beer. And I love beer. And I can make beer for people that don't want to feel bloated from drinking it. I can make, and it'll still taste like beer. I can make beer for people that don't want, something that's bitter, and it'll still taste like beer. And I can make beer for people that want something that's really fruit forward, and it's still going to taste like beer. I'm going to Belgium next week, and I can't wait to go and drink Kriek and Framboise. I love those beers, and they taste like beer to me. And so, if the trend, in this very competitive environment is to make a beer taste like orange soda pop, I'm probably not following that trend. But I went out to Southern California of all places and tried a bunch of hazy IPAs that I thought to myself, man, I'm clearly missing something about these beers, because my favorite word in the description lexicon is compelling. And I just had not found anything that I found compelling about those beers. I found a lot of really sloppily made ones. I found ones that tasted, felt like chalk in my mouth because of the sheer amount of yeast that was left in it. I found a lot of diacetyl-ridden ones and ones that had oxidation and stuff like that. But I hadn't found anything that was compelling.
Yeah.
And then I was like, man, these beers, okay, they're compelling. They're really good.
Yeah.
And that's what I've always tried to make, and that's what I always want to make, is beers that I find compelling. And hopefully other people do too.
Right.
And I feel like my integrity depends on that as a brewer, to make things that I both like and I find fit with my the overall brand of La Cumbre and the driving spirit of what we do day in and day out, and that's what we do. We make beer that we believe in, and we make beer that we find compelling.
I think that's a great place to wrap this up. Thanks, Jeff.
Thanks, Jamie.
Many thanks to this episode's sponsors. G&D Chiller is the brewing industry's premier choice for glycol chilling. Join the community of homebrewers at the AHA. Bring the world to your brew house with select ingredients from BSG. And SS Brewtech is advancing brewing equipment design, performance, and quality. So, Jeff, if our listeners want to hear and learn more about La Cumbre, where do they find you?
You can find us on Facebook and Instagram at La Cumbre Brewing. And you can find us on the World Wide Web at lacumbrebrewing.com.
Or at your tap room.
Absolutely. We have two tap rooms, one on the east side of Albuquerque at our production brewery in a very industrial district, and also a bright, shiny new one over at Coors and Montano in the New Andalusia Plaza.
Very cool. I encourage everyone to go. Beautiful state and a beautiful brewery.
Come visit Albuquerque. There's a lot of great reasons to visit Albuquerque, and the breweries are certainly one of them.
Yeah. If you've enjoyed this episode, we sure hope you'll go to beerandbrewing.com and click on that subscribe button, become a subscriber to the magazine. Also use whatever podcast platform you use and subscribe to the podcast there. We appreciate your support. We'll be back next week with a new episode. Thanks, Jeff.
Thank you.
This podcast is brought to you by Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine, for those that love to make and drink great beer. Learn more online or subscribe at beerandbrewing.com or find us on social media at Craft Beer Brew.